Welcome everyone to the Belonging Collaborative webinar series. This is the second webinar that is hosted by Toniic. I'll share a little bit more about the Belonging Collaborative just to give everyone context. But for those of you who I don't know yet, I'm Dipti Pratt, Managing Director of Global Membership and Head of Americas at Toniic. I am so excited for who we have in the room today. We're going to have a really interactive question set conversation, and also hopefully questions and insights from you guys. So let's see, let's make sure my screen advances for us. Okay, so about the Belonging Collaborative. The Belonging Collaborative is a set of 6 peer organizations who have come together with the intention of how do we share and advance racial equity across the investment industry. I'm actually going to ask for those of you that are part of the Belonging Collaborative and are in the room today just to say hi via chat. The organizations that make this up include ASBN, Confluence, Philanthropy, the Impact Capital Managers, Intentional Endowment Network, and Toniic. So for those of you that don't know Toniic is a global community focused on catalyzing deeper positive net impact across the spectrum of capital. We do this in 2 ways: 1, through supporting our members, and 2, in supporting the field at large. And really our intention and goal with all of the work we do is how do we move impact investors further, whether they're joining or they're already leading in the ecosystem. So for the point of today's conversation, we're just going to operate on Chatham House rules. So the intention there is, feel free to absorb the information, but please don't specifically quote or recognize someone and attribute to someone. Really, the intention for that is how do we have a really frank dialogue and conversation? Our intention is to go further together. And by using these kind of conversations, the intention is let's also keep it among us. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to our 3 speakers. We have a number of great speakers in the room today. First, we have joining us Rachel Robasciotti, who is the CEO and founder of Adesina Social Capital, which is an investment and financial activism firm, serving truly as a critical bridge between financial markets and social justice movements. Second, joined with us today is Jim Casselberry, who's co-founder and CEO of Known. He has over 30 years of experience in investing, impact investing, investment management, and investment consulting. And third, joining us today is Morgan Simon. Morgan Simon has over 2 decades of experience making finance a tool for social justice. She's founding partner at Candide Group and also served as the first and founding executive director here at Toniic. So with that, welcome to everyone in the room. We're going to spend most of our time in conversation with the 3 of them. However, really the intention is ask questions. If you don't feel comfortable asking questions directly to the group, you can direct message those questions and I'll try and integrate them into our questions and our conversation, or we'll also save a few minutes at the end of the time to allow for us to have somewhat of a group conversation. So with that, let me stop screen sharing so that I can see you guys. All right, so let's get started. When we think about kind of what the first best steps are, what do you consider to be the first best steps to consider a racial equity approach as an impact investor? What are really the activities one can consider when reducing the racial gap? And what are the most important things to do in down markets? So I'm going to turn this over to you first, Jim.
Well, thank you, Dipti. I really do appreciate it. And I'm just honored to be on this group with 2 of my favorite people, with Morgan and Rachel. But, when we think about impact investing, all investments make some level of impact. And so it's what we choose for how we look at outcomes and how we look at return. So if we want to change things, if we want to be able to move things, we have to also look at what our core policies are around those to be able to do that. So, we have this axiom from maximizing shareholder value from University of Chicago, Milton Friedman. But if we think about shareholder value, we're narrowly defining it as financial return. And there's utility to return. And so I think if we look and see what maximizing financial return is currently done to our economy and to our society, we need to do some things better. And so if we're going to change that, we need to change the way that we approach it. And the way that we can change that, the start of that, is to, one, let's look at our investment policies. Let's make sure that we are defining that we want to have different outcomes. That, yes, we want to have financial return, but at the same time, we also want to have different outcomes. And we can define what those outcomes are in those policies. And that's the way that I think that we get started in the implementation of that.
Perfect. Other thoughts, Rachel and Morgan?
Well, I just want to say that I'm really happy that this collective is having this conversation right now in an environment when so many communities are being quiet. So I'm very happy that this conversation is happening, and I'm delighted to be here with Jim and Morgan. We've been doing work together side by side for many years. The things that we generally recommend, and I'll put a resource in the chat from our website at Edisina, is we generally say that if you want to get started with any kind of impact investing, you should ask 3 questions. One of those questions, and look for intuitive answers. If you're an asset owner, whether you're an institutional asset owner on a foundation investment committee, for example, or you're just a person investing their own retirement funds, look for some intuitive answers to these questions. And the first is, what impact issues are you addressing through my investments? So if it's just the environment, then it's not actually addressing racial equity in any way or the racial wealth gap. The second is, how are you interpreting and measuring that impact? That's the most important key. So look for intuitive answers. If they say we're just using data that's reported from companies themselves, but it's not being third-party verified, that might feel a little suspicious. And then the last one is, who are you talking to make your decisions about how to solve for impact in that way? And that's the most important question, I believe, when we're looking at any of the issues surrounding social justice, whether it's racial, gender, economic, and climate justice, which is also included. You really have to be talking to the communities who are closest to the problems and closest to the solutions, and move outside of our kind of finance bubble of finance folks talking to each other about how to fix the world. So I'll put some resources. We wrote an article on that in the chat.
No, I think that's really helpful framing, right? Because it really gets to, okay, who are you actually reaching and how close are you? And bringing that forward really matters. When you think about what's missing, Morgan, from us advancing this work, what is that? What does that look like from your point of view?
I think 2 things. I think the start is conviction. That I think one of the things that we know as a field that we've done a great job of is that we choose key questions that we want to answer and we answer them, right? So I think 10 years ago, there was, can impact investment scale? Is impact investment going to be profitable? We did a great job on those questions, right? And I think the question that sometimes was kind of a laggard was, is this going to matter? Is the impact going to matter? So I think that's one thing of kind of organizing and having the conviction that these are issues that we want to solve. And then the second is about methodology. So I think in terms of first step, it's even understanding where you're at, of kind of doing that audit organizationally in terms of where your investments are and kind of seeing, I think there are times we go in with great intentions, but that we wind up embracing criteria that ultimately introduce systemic bias in a way that we didn't anticipate. So when we have managers, and I hear this all the time, that won't invest in first-time funds, that won't invest in funds under 100 million, you can say that those are not racialized criteria, but they absolutely are. When we talk about what does it take to have the startup capital, for instance, to be able to start a fund and to be able to build experience. So I think we have to go kind of often one step deeper in terms of even if we say our values are there, something in our practices is not lining up with their values, right? So the extent to which we can audit those practices, and I think that's where I think there's going to be lots of times where I'm going to say today, thanks to Rachel's leadership on X, Y, or Z, one of those is the due diligence 2.0 commitment, right? I'm kind of really looking at what is it step by step that we need to do differently to introduce a racial equity lens. And the final piece that I'll say, and the importance of thinking about it as a lens, is that one of the elements around racial equity investing is that it's not a vertical. It's not like when we say, okay, I do climate change, I do food justice and healthy food, and I do affordable housing. It's that racial equity hits all those issues, right? And it means that that can be a consistent question that we need to be asking regardless of issues, right? So we also want to make sure that it's something we consistently incorporate as opposed to something that is its own vertical. That doesn't make sense to me. And I think that is a lot of what happened in the last couple of years.
No, I think that's great. I think actually that leads nicely to my next question of like where we are
Dipti,
today. Yeah, go
Dipti,
ahead.
can I add one thing to what
Please, go, go,
Morgan
go.
just said? So historically, if we look at what happened over the last 40 years, in when they had minority programs, when they had the set aside programs, when they had all of those failed, exactly for the reason that Morgan pointed out, because they were a subset of the whole. So if you did have a manager that outperformed, that was in that program, 9 times out of 10 in those programs that they succeeded, and then they had the same result if another manager was horrible and got fired. There was no space for them if they were successful. The programs weren't designed. The programs were designed usually on a political bet, not a value bet. 30 years ago, we were doing impact invest. Part of our investing at MacArthur was to be inclusive of looking at opportunities that were also program related and investments related to programs versus program PRIs. And we were successful, but our problem was nobody captured those stories.
Mm-hmm.
And so part of that is, as we've said, is the change that we have to do in how we think. I'm thinking 30 years from now, people are going to look back and say, wow, how stupid were we that we only invested for financial return?
Plus one on that for sure. When you think about why is so little happening, right? I mean, Jim, you've been in this, you've seen the ebb and flow. Certainly there have been proclamations and intentions made over the last few years. Like, why do you think this is? And how should we be showing up for those that we're trying to serve in this moment?
Well, mainly it's because of the issues that plague our society, and part of that is it's the colonialism that we're still living, right? It hasn't gone away. It's been institutionalized. It's been institutionalized, and it's been grilled into our DNA and bias. And so it's the idea that even when we've seen people of color get to levels of success, they're still going to the same old axiom of, well, I better get, I know somebody who I know who could do this, but I better go to to the historic guys that have been doing this. I need to go there, because if not, I'm not going to do well. So we really have to change the paradigm in the way that we think. And that I think it's obvious when you have what Rachel's going to be putting up in the chat with what Morgan's going to be talking about. We do know the things to do. We have the tools to do the things that we know to do. And we have to use our common sense that what we're doing just ain't working. We got to do better. We got to do this differently.
I really want to double click on what Morgan brought forward, and generally encouraging us to do better. There is a pathway for taking action, which is the due diligence 2.0 commitment. I'm the chat lady today because I really think actionable resources are very helpful. So I'm going to send you to an SEC report that underscores this very fact. It's the SEC report on and recommendations on diversity and inclusion in the asset management industry. When you're looking at the question of why so little capital is flowing, despite our focus on this, I mean, I think in the Knight Foundation report, we went from 1.2 to 1.4. of all assets are managed by women and people of color combined. The SEC report directly focuses on a narrow due diligence checklist of exclusionary factors that eliminate nearly all asset management firms owned by women and people of color. And they say it right there. Discrimination against diverse managers has effectively been codified into due diligence checklists. So, if you don't believe us, listen to the SEC and look at the due diligence 2.0 commitment to start to do something about it.
I actually want to bring another element of conversation into this, which is how do we also think about the relationship between class and race? So when thinking about racial justice investing, is it addressing both of these? Is it limited to one or the other? I'd love your insights.
Sure. I think it's absolutely critical to address this from an intersectional lens. I don't think there's ever a way to address one without the other. It's like saying if there's not just a cut, but a gaping wound, that's racial inequity in America. And then you layer this infection on top of it of poverty. You absolutely need to address the ways that those work in tandem. And this came up really starkly for me the other day. I'm on the investment committee of the Decarceration Fund, which is a fund that's supporting folks who are trying to interrupt the cycles of mass incarceration. And they were receiving their first CRA investment, right, from a bank where they need to be specifically addressing poverty in certain zip codes. So how do you draw that link, right? For CRA credit is showing that addressing mass incarceration is addressing poverty. One of the things that was pretty, it's one of those where maybe it's obvious and shocking all at the same time, but rates of incarceration are not necessarily correlated as much with crime, the amount of actual crime that happened in an area. What it's more correlated with is poverty. Amount of poverty in a zip code is what determines how many people are getting arrested. And to kind of paraphrase Brian Stevenson, the idea that it's better to be rich and guilty in America than it is to be poor and innocent. And then when you weigh on top of that, I'm going to run through some stats, but roll with me here. When you look nationally, right, like 800 police jurisdictions, it's that arrest rates for Black folks are 5 times as high as for white people. And then in 250 of those jurisdictions, it's 10 times higher. And then the one additional stat to layer on top of that, 87.5% of people that are in jail have not actually been convicted of a crime yet, right? The crime was being too poor to pay bail. And while that happens, right, you can be losing your job, you can have your car impounded, you can have all these terrible economic outcomes happen for you and your family. I'm getting emotional because I'm dealing with this with a friend right now. And basically that you can absolutely have your economic reality taken away from you before you've even actually been convicted, right? And I think that's where we wind up with this kind of continuing cycle of then if you're trying to work towards home ownership, for instance, but now you've lost your job, and then Black households, Blackstar just put out in their impact report, 40% less likely to be prepared for home ownership than white households. So the way that these work in concert, that we have systems that just have incredibly racialized outcomes, as much as police systems may try to hide this. And then you add the overlap of poverty, which just exacerbates it, right? So the question isn't that you need to solve one or the other. I think that would be ridiculous. That would be like saying, we're going to treat the infection, but leave the wound, right? Or vice versa, right? So I think those are often put as oppositional concepts as opposed to intersectional concepts. And it's that we basically can never leave out one or the other.
Other thoughts, Jim or Rachel? And Morgan, it'd be great if you prop some of those, or we can follow up with some of those stats, because I think that story is really interesting and it's out there.
Well, Morgan brings up a great, if we think about African-American males, and if we think about the number of African-American males that are in jail, and there's no path. There's no path to be able to get back into society, to get back into the economic society. When you fill out a job application, when you post something, when you do anything, it follows you. And then if you do get back in, then you're a novelty that's like held up of the magical Negro. Sorry, guys, but anyway. um, and you know, when we look in our inner cities and we see violence, that's an economic result. It's an economic result of not having opportunity, that where a gun becomes the best economic tool to be able to capture wealth, to be able to capture safety, to be able to do what other people do with the opportunities that they have to do it with a gun. And that is because we have the decisions in the wrong people's hands. You know, we have to figure out a way. If we could figure out a way of how to get the human capital that's in jail into the economy, it's great for all of us. And we have to do this. We have to do this differently. You know, Brian Stevenson is a great is showing us a better path to be able to think about this, to be able to execute it. That we shouldn't think about somebody about what happened on their worst day, or what's happened to them because of the situation that society has pounded them into. And then we get angry at the result of that. And then we punish the afflicted. So I'm going to hop off my box.
No, I think it's really important to share. Rachel, anything you want to add? I want to make sure I hear your voice as well here.
Thank you. I actually really appreciate Morgan and Jim sharing most of my thoughts and some of my feelings too. Just from my own personal experience, where I grew up in poverty, in rural poverty, and where I grew up, the men were incarcerated or killed by the police, like in overwhelming numbers. We were families, therefore, like as a result of women, and the jobs in the community typically went to men. So that combination of things meant that because we were Black, we were also women. Because we were women, we were poor. So there's this through line of, you know, racial, gender, economic, they're all tied together. It's going to be the same communities that we extract from. So what it's really going to take is a broader effort to move away from an extractive economy and toward one that's actually regenerative and sustainable long term.
Yeah. I want to make sure I invite those that have questions to pop them in the chat. We are going to make sure we save time for a conversation, but I also want to make sure that we capture your thoughts and insights while this is really meant to be a collaborative conversation. I want to turn a little bit to some of the backlash that we're seeing and experiencing right now in this moment. When you think about what you're seeing around the backlash, what are some collective efforts that you're seeing to process this or to counterbalance this? Are there defensive, offensive strategies that are emerging that folks in the room here should be showing up for, that are yet not created, that we should be thinking about? I'd love to turn to you, Rachel, to hear your thoughts.
Sure. I believe that it's not only racial justice and racial equity investing, so those of us who are interested in DEI, but it's actually the same funders who are looking for the same outcomes that are attacking ESG investing more broadly as well. And we see this as a huge sign of backlash. And the way that I'm speaking of is there's a collection of people across DEI, ESG, and impact investing who have come together to stand up a new legal initiative to counter this backlash, because what's happening is that there's a lot of good work happening to defend investors in different pockets, but that work isn't necessarily coordinated. And it's not public yet. It will be public next month. And if you are part of the Adesina community, we originally put information out there about this, just kind of about the backlash. The way that you can get that is by signing up for our newsletter. You'll get kind of the update to this. But there's a group of Black women who came together across DEI, ESG, impact investing to create a membership organization that's first initiative is going to be a legal initiative that enables investors to boldly pursue justice and sustainability despite the backlash, and really going to be responsive to what investors have told us that they need. Investors need to know what the legal best practices are. They need to know that they will be, they can get referred to legal counsel that's competent in DEI, ESG, and impact investing, and that legal counsel is networked, right, with the other cases and strategies that are happening. And people are also looking for an organization to represent investors very boldly across the spectrum of DEI, ESG, and impact, and to have a real communication strategy for countering this. It's not just about defense, though. It's also about affirming our rights. So we also need to resource the legal actors. So we need to make sure they're talking to one another. I can't tell you how many different legal efforts are doing very similar things and could be sharing resources. That's something that we're already starting to do. And also, you know, some of the attorneys are looking for plaintiffs for some of those affirmative cases. And investors tell us they'd be willing to take an affirmative stance if they felt like they were covered. So if you want to learn more about that, I put some information in the chat. You should, late in March, we will be announcing, it's something we'll be announcing, and it's going to be a membership organization that's only open to investors. So while we're going to be very public with investors, we'll be highly vetting members, because it's clear that the attacks that we're seeing are the result of some very clear and strategic planning on the other side. And so we need to similarly do some thoughtful work that, you know, just in our community. And what we need to be successful right now, we are raising money for this initiative. We're raising $2 million for the first year. So please reach out to me, particularly if you're interested in funding. We have many institutional funders who are talking to us. And after we launch, if you sign up for the Addisina Community Newsletter, after we launch, join the organization as members. I mean, basically, we'll be funding our own insurance policy to make sure that that this backlash really does become a sign of progress and not something that slows us down in our pursuit of justice and sustainability.
Very, very helpful. Go ahead, Morgan.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, no, I fully agree and appreciate, Rachel, like just pulling out the idea that backlash is because you're making progress. And I think that this is something that we forget sometimes. And that also sometimes we need to be okay with a fight, and that is okay, and that we can survive these fights, and definitely can speak from experience, as some folks on the line may know. A couple years back, having been part of a very successful campaign that pulled about 90% of private prison financing from two of the largest private prison companies, we got sued, claiming we'd caused $55 million of damage. And it was great of the prisons to actually total that number up for us. Right? We didn't know. But we survived it. I mean, I think that's the most important point. And as it was happening, I was so shocked. I think I was so used to, in my little investor bubble, right? Because I've been in investment roles the last 20 years of who's going to come after me, everything we do is positive, and then all of a sudden have this drop in my lap. And I remember one of my Black friends very kindly told me, she was like, "Oh, it never occurred to you that they would come after you. Like you're not used to that. And you need to get more used to that, because that's part of being an ally, is that that might happen, and just be prepared and deal with it, grow up," which was great advice. And we did, and we managed it. And then I think the second piece that's really important is remembering that cultural change precedes all political change. And that's a line stolen from Jeff Chang, the hip hop journalist, that we need to really think about, especially at this legally murky moment, right? That actually we haven't been told that we can't invest in diverse entrepreneurs, and therefore we should keep doing it, and that we should keep advancing the narrative that we absolutely can do that, right? So that, I think, had been our first kind of response. I'm going to drop a piece we put in Forbes in the chat of really quickly coming back of we're not done, just because, there's some strategy, there's some speculation to say that, we're going to therefore cower in fear, just doesn't make sense, especially when, going back to what Jim mentioned, we have all the data, we have all the receipts in terms of, if you have diverse teams, they will outperform. that this is just smart investing. We may additionally have racial equity goals, but even if I didn't have those, I want smart investment strategies. So I think you kind of put all those different elements together of we can seed a different cultural narrative in terms of the importance of investing in diverse entrepreneurs as investment strategy, as a racial equity strategy, and we can be more prepared, which is why I appreciate the group that Rachel is bringing together. We can be more prepared when that backlash happens and not run from it. That we'll keep moving forward and we'll be okay.
Jim, anything you'd like to? Oh, go ahead, Rachel.
I do want to hear from Jim. I just want to say one more thing. When we first started hearing all of this happening, I have to just say, like, as an investor, I was scared. I was worried. I wanted, I was, and I just remember that feeling of like, oh, they're going after us. They're going after folks for exactly the kind of investor mobilization work that we do. And it's really interesting coming together in community. Something that I learned just growing up in the Black community, it was the only way to survive in a poor Black community. Coming together is the way to survive. It has been so beautiful bringing this group together and seeing all of the legal actors, all of the funders, all of the people who are all in, where people aren't asking you questions about whether or not this is necessary. They're asking questions about how to help. We just got... We have like more interest and collective activity around this than I think anybody in the industry really realizes. So I'm very happy to move this forward and share it with everyone that follows us. But ultimately, I do really feel now like I'm not worried about them coming after any one of us and any one of our members. We're going to be ready.
Again, the example of why I love Rachel and Morgan. But guys, we have to get off of our back foot. The first thing everybody does, what do? They try to attack a nonprofit group, not calling it the weakest among us, but that's the strategy. And everybody reacts to it. Everybody starts acting like, oh, we can't do it. We're doing something wrong. No, we're not. We're doing something right. This is what you're supposed to do. The whole idea that ESG is something political, that if I care about environmental, social, and governance, that's bad for the portfolio, that's good management. That's a management. That's a management focus. Do you want a CEO that doesn't care about those things running a company? We don't invest in Dow Chemical anymore. And is it easy to ignore that? Yes, it is. If we look at it, and then the stuff with Bloom of going out and attacking all of the different things. We spend time focusing on the attack versus focusing on moving it forward. And we have to take the fight. We have to take the fight. If a bully hits you and it makes you cower, that's not going to solve it. We have to be in the position to be able to do it. Rachel, thanks for sharing all of the things that we're doing. But, even if we think back to the civil rights movement, if we think back to all of the things that were progressive, those were fights. And so this is it as well. But the other thing is as we're a cautionary tale, as we're looking for solutions, we don't want to have an unintended result of causing more problems, right? So just like with the war on poverty, we had some issues with the assistance to families, made it more economically viable for the head of the household, for the male head of the household to be outside of it. That was one of the contributing factors. When we saw all of the bills that came after World War II with the GI Bill with the tuition assistance, with FHA, VHA, all of those, the unintended consequence of those, or intended consequence of those, was exclusionary to people of color and to women, single heads of households. So as we're doing this, we have to look at the outcomes and how they affect. And, you know, one of the things that we have to do is we have to be flexible. We have to be able to pivot. Just because we've done one thing that we think fixes something, we have to then monitor and check it to make sure that we don't have unintended consequences from those changes. And, you know, one of the things that Morgan made me reflect on is we have to continue to look so that we monitor what we do, we pay attention to what we do, and then we communicate and share it. Just like with what Rachel is doing, even if you don't, let's say you don't agree with due diligence 2.0, so what? Do something different then. If you don't like that, then do something different. Don't poop on 2.0, you know, do something that's different, or leverage it, or say, hey, Rachel, I came up with this. What do you think about that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. What I'm hearing is it's race day. We're all going to run a different way, but we need to run to that collective finish line. I want to call Mezu into the conversation. I see you've raised your hand to ask something. I'm actually offering you to come off mute to share. And then I have a couple more questions before I turn it to the larger group. And if it's tricky, I can read it out.
I'm having trouble hearing.
I'm having trouble hearing, so I'm going to read the question just in spirit of time. So many institutional investors are unfamiliar with cross-innovative solutions to addressing system-level challenges. How can creative startups engage this work to develop solutions with measurable outcomes? And I'll also engage a few other ecosystems, right? Like how can we show up? How should we be thinking about this at a system level?
I changed my audio in case this is better. Okay.
I did. Perfect. Thank you. I can hear you.
Sure.
I asked the question, were you able to hear me, or did you want to add anything? Otherwise, I'll turn it to...
No. That's great. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. All right, over to you guys, Jim, Rachel, Morgan.
I think TIP, the Investment Integration Project, has done some really important work around this, funded by the Cerdna Foundation, looking at racial inequity as a systemic risk. I helped collaborate on that report. So there's a really lovely full report that I put as a reply to that question. It does take some thinking about how to frame this as a systemic risk and really bake it into everything you're doing. And they have advice, here's how to change your investment policy. Here's how, to change many different aspects of what you're doing. So there's a lot of resources there. We are, at this point in our racial equity journey, we are not at a loss for resources.
No, and well, to that point, we are going to capture the resources that have been shared in chat, and we'll send them around. And if there are others from folks in the room that haven't yet shared them but have thought of something, send them to the Toniic team, and we'll make sure we get those in. So when we think about data, when we think about how we're showing up for the communities, what is the data out there? What are the most important kind of rating, research, benchmarks? What do you recommend, Jim?
So much of this is driven by your investment policy. So much of it is driven by what your expectation is for what your returns are going to be, right? So that's how everybody sets this up anyway. It's so when we talk about data, we have the data. And so part of the thing is that the difficulty is we have advisors, we have consultants that their business models aren't conducive to assist investors to be able to do this. So one of the things that we're doing at Known is we're not focused on public pension plans. We're focused on those wealth holders that want different, but they go to their current advisors, they go to their current consultants, and they tell them that they can't. So we want to be able to be the solution that gives that to them. You know, that's what Morgan's doing. That's what Rachel's doing. You know, so you can't solve this by going to BlackRock. You can't solve this by going to Blackstone. You can't solve this by going to JP Morgan. You have to solve this by going to different providers, different consultants, those that are aligned with the things that you know are common sense, with the things that you know are better. So, you know, to those data sources, you know, when we started in investments, there wasn't, within my investment lifetime, there wasn't GIPS. People would just report performance pretty much any way they wanted to. Then there was a standard. So we're developing that standard now on the way that we should invest in the future. Impact, you know, be it environmental, be it whatever. But sometimes this is just so frustrating for me not to just start throwing out about a bunch of F-bombs. But anyway, we know that we need to do things better. We can't keep on going to the same stale solutions and expect different results. You know, so if we think about what TIIP has done, if you look at what Jen is doing and with the UN Sustainable Goals, all of that isn't sourced to perfection yet, but neither was GIPS. When we were first doing institutional investment management and doing, how do we rate private equity? How do we value it? How do we value it within the portfolio? So this idea that we can't do things differently and that we can't do things better is just a fallacy. So there are the structures out there. There are the tools that are out there already. Rachel's put a lot of them. Morgan's put stuff out there. We just need to lose what's different, but then it's not the Bible. We can monitor the outcome, we can monitor the changes, and we can pivot it as necessary to be able to do it, to be able to have better outcomes. And then as time goes on, we'll get better at it. And we are getting better at it. All it be, what, a 0.2% increase? But it's an increase. Did
you want to add anything, Rachel and Morgan?
There are so many resources in the chat. Like I said, the problem is not resources. The problem is not evidence. The issue is action. And I believe there's a very nuanced situation here where, as asset owners, we choose gatekeepers and we choose them to keep us safe because we aren't as knowledgeable about investing. The gatekeepers are doing their job when they say no to certain investment strategies, asset managers. So they're doing their job. The way that they say no is through their due diligence process. It's that process that has so many inequities baked into it. And so what you have to do, and the harder way to do this, I believe, is to get your gatekeeper to change their due diligence processes. The easier way is to change your gatekeeper. And there are plenty of gatekeepers. If you go to the Due Diligence 2.0 commitment website, there's a whole list of asset allocators that have signed. And those are all people who've committed to use those principles.
Thank you. Let's turn to action. Let's talk about action, because I think, I mean, to your point, like this, even just the chat shows the amount of resource, the amount of knowledge we don't lack for. Is this the right thing? And I think the folks in this room believe it is. But let's talk about action. What collective action movements and organizations are you seeing being effective in changing the conversation, changing the systems? Rachel, what are you seeing here?
Well, I think Morgan already mentioned one thing that I want to highlight. I think it's the social justice organizations that are led by and doing work on behalf of the communities that are most impacted by our extractive capitalist system, by racial injustice. So you're looking for those organizations with leadership from those communities that are directly connected to those communities. And the organizations that partner with investors are really powerful. So Candide, Adesina, the Racial Justice Investing Coalition were all part of the efforts in 2022 that led to the failure of the Alabama prison bond issue, which was the first time a bond issue had come to market and failed purely as a result of shareholder activism. And that was possible because Adesina, Candide, the Racial Justice Investing Coalition were all in touch with social justice organizations on the ground doing that work. And I think, Candide, you were even in touch with some of the prisoners in the prison that they were talking about rebuilding. So I think that the organizations that make those connections are very powerful because investors are the owners of business. And business is what is holding our collective resources. We need those large collective resources to address very large problems like racial injustice.
I think one thing I would add, kind of digging back into that question of who are the gatekeepers. I am a gatekeeper and fully acknowledge that. And it means that I also need to sit into thinking about, when am I the right gatekeeper, or when is my job actually to be the facilitator of making sure the right people are the gatekeepers, and they may not look like me, right? And that some of our investors that I really love, some who are even on the line today, right, who have that self-awareness to say, rather than just we're going to define impact as whatever generally wealthy white folks think it should be, are saying, well, whose definition should matter here? And one of the things I learned, kind of one of those adages in working with activists from the Global South, was the principle of nothing about us without us. And how do we think about that in the context of, if we are making decisions on behalf of other people's lives, that's an unbelievable amount of responsibility in terms of really doing that thoughtfully. And part of how we've thought to do that is times to be facilitators rather than gatekeepers. So in Candide, we mostly work with families and foundations that want their money working for justice and building custom portfolios, but we have two debt funds, Olamina and Afterglow, that focus on U.S. community development and climate justice, and both have community advisory boards where for anything to get into the pipeline, that community has to first decide that they support the impact thesis. And then at the end of the diligence, they have to approve it again and have the ability to veto investments. And we think that that's really critical. And then that first community board, in the case of Olamina, they then selected the next participants, right? So we as the gatekeepers had zero control over that process, but made sure that it happened, and were part of ensuring that investors felt really comfortable with this question of that the right people are getting to make decisions about elements that impact their communities. So if you want to see more about these boards and who's on them, I'm going to drop a couple links. But that's just one concrete example. I think people can do that in different ways, but I do think that gatekeepers in general, to take a moment to say, who is the right person to make this decision, or who needs to be in the room for me to make an accountable decision, that might shift what your room looks like. And I think that can lead to a lot of cool processes.
And I think finance doesn't already have the connections to those people being in the room. So it means that we are the investors, we're the people with the power, and it's incumbent upon us to reach out to the folks from that community. And if you're committed to it, it requires a lot of translation work. Just think about the word equity. It could mean racial equity, it could mean ownership in a company. Think about voting rights. We came out with an investment screen for civil and voting rights. We had to be very careful about how we worded it, because when you talk about voting rights, shareholders have voting rights, but there's also the voting rights that are being deteriorated in the American South. So there's a ton of translation that's required. So it takes a deep commitment on the side of the financial professional who speaks the language of finance to translate when you have those people in the room. And at Addisina, we have a stewardship circle, and that stewardship circle from the communities that are most impacted has direct communication with our portfolio management team. And that is just something that doesn't happen very often, and the kind of structures we need to set up for accountability if we are going to be sourcing, ensuring that what we're doing is good for the community, as Morgan was talking about.
Beautiful. I want to offer a chance for folks in the room who had questions, who wanted to take this conversation to answer something specifically you're battling with. Is there anyone here that would like to bring a question forward to our panelists today? I have more, but go ahead, Sherry.
Good morning, and thank you for this conversation. And thank you, Jim, for sharing this on LinkedIn. We're very excited to be in a room of thinkers who are thinking about change and being change makers in this field. I've been attending quite a bit of conferences and gatherings put forth by major institutions for their process of reaching out, creating relationships with emerging managers or their part of their DEI response. CalPERS and CalSTRS launched Catalyst. And I really appreciate your 2.0 strategy because, of course, we're all still held to the same criteria as major investors. But what I feel like is missing, we spend a lot of time going to these, there's PRIA, there's all these other things that my business partner, Kimberly Brown, is activated in. There's no marketplace. And when you look at how people are able to share deals and what they're doing and who gets to see what, there are a multitude of marketplaces where those deals are floated. I wanted to know, how can your collaborative and the leadership here help to create a marketplace for impact investment, sponsors and transactions, so that we can have a place to share?
I don't know, Dipti, if you're able to speak on behalf of the whole collaborative. I think that what you're talking about is really important, like to actually have a place to go where these are diverse managers who are doing things that actually benefit the communities we intend to impact. I know that Impact Finance Center has been working on something like that for a number of years. What it ultimately ends up coming down to, I'll just emphasize this point again, is your willingness to change your gatekeeper. And it's hard because your gatekeeper is the person you trust. It's your gatekeeper that is tasked with knowing where to find the diverse investing options for you, right? So I think that tends to be the rub. There's a lot of high trust between people and their gatekeepers are using systems that are racially unjust. So I think that's really the rub, because it's that asset allocator, that financial advisor, investment consultant that's telling you, what's available to you and what they would recommend. And while we are not asset allocators, people like Jim and Morgan are. So talk to them.
Yeah, no, and to what Cherie was talking about, and hello, Cherie, how are you? What is, we also need to make sure that we're able to have those ecosystems, right? The ecosystem of connection, so that if somebody does have an idea or does have a program and they want to be able to bring it together, instead of wasting time talking to those that aren't interested, to at least be able to be within an ecosystem or network where people are interested and they can point you in the right direction, or co-invest or be around what you're doing. One of the things that I just want to keep on pushing, and those of us that are in positions to make different decisions, we have to make different decisions. We can't keep on doing it. And, so often, I'm 64 years old, and I can be much more brazen than I was at 32. I was pretty brazen at 32, but I can be more. And, literally, Wilshire, Aon, Cambridge, 95% of their clients don't care about this. and they have to monetize the decisions that they make over their entire platform. So if only 5%, or let's be crazy, say 20% of it cares about it, they got to focus on the 80. And that's what they do. And then if you look at the average consultant is a white male from a Midwestern state university. Nothing wrong with that, but there's no scope there. And then to one other thing that was brought up, you know, there's a thing, Nobel oblige, right? We can't think that we know better, even when we're in these chairs. There was a fabulous example, made an investment in North Carolina in a group of guys, Pi, and they were going to use a loan program to help equity, and we were going to be the friends and family with African-American entrepreneurs so they could buy their principal piece of business. Well, when we went out to launch it, I thought it was a great idea, but we showed up and the guy said, "You're not our friend. You're not our family." Right? So we had to go back and we had to figure out how to be able to show up that was digestible to them, right? Even though we thought we had a great idea. So that's part of the thing that we also have to check. And I talked about it earlier on the unintended consequences. And what that means is even when you have something in place, you have to continue to check. You have to continue to be willing to pivot. And you have to continue to push. What's Andreessen's batting average? Maybe 200? Maybe? So, but if you look at black and brown, we have to be damn near perfect. We can't make a mistake. If my biggest fear is right now for all this money that's gone out over the last 4 years, there's nobody now there to, as these funds now have to go for fund 3 or fund 4, what's going to happen when they go back to one of their principal investors? It might have been the equal, and the program's gone, and there's nobody there to re-up. So, I'm sorry. Let somebody else talk.
I'm actually going to have to do the awful thing of close us. Somehow we have passed an hour, and I know we could stay longer, but I'm going to give Jim, Rachel, and Morgan one last comment if everyone can stay with us for just one more minute. Thank you. Thank you to Jim. Thank you to Rachel. Thank you to Morgan for showing up, for sharing today, for the work you do, and for what you bring to the Toniic community as members. And thank you to everyone who showed up today and for all the work you're doing in the field. But before we close out, any last comments, Jim, Rachel, or Morgan, that you would like to bring to the home?
Simple. Let's end the fuckery.
Love you, Jim. That's perfect. I just want to ditto on that. Stay in touch with us at Adesina. You can reach out to invest@adesina.com. I'll put that in the chat. And also you can text the word justice to 55444. And, we'd be happy to have you as part of the community. Invest in our exchange traded fund and change your allocator if you can't. Go to Jim, go to Morgan.
I'll close very simply, which is just what is my intention? What are my practices? If I stack those side by side, and the third would be, what are my outcomes, right? Intentions, practices, outcomes. What are the ways in which those are working in alignment? What are times that those are out of alignment? And once I identify the points of being out of alignment, how can I seek change? And I think we can be gentle with ourselves in that process. That I think we need to battle, or balance is the better word, urgency, because these are real issues that people are dealing with every day, with gentleness of knowing that we as individuals are in the middle of this. So that's where I think if we can balance those 3 elements ultimately, then we can find ways to move forward.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you. Stay tuned. And this is the second of 6 webinars with maybe more F-bombs, maybe less, yet to be determined. So come on back for more. You'll receive the links, the resources, and the next webinar in your email. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for hanging around. Goodbye. Take care.